This is supposed to be this way? I guess I'm going to stand here anyway. Welcome to the final lecture in the spring series, nearing the end of the semester. 3 more weeks. For those of you that aren't students or faculty here, if you're interested in seeing what happens around here by way of the students and the faculty, the week of April 19th through the 26th is the final review week, so from morning till night there's projects being presented and everyone's welcome. Also, I'd like to thank the lecture crew led by Margie Reeve, Sanam, Simzar, Lolo Gutierrez, Deborah Cohen, Luis Herrera, Barry Jacobs, David Montalba, and Jai Lim. They did, as the students normally do, a pretty great job in producing the series, finding a wide range of people to talk about, a wide range of things, all of which fit into what we call architecture, even though they're not all architects that talked. There's going to be 3 short intros, including mine. The lecturer tonight couldn't decide among her 3 boyfriends which one she wanted to introduce her. So the only privilege I had was to go first. Michael Dobry gets seconds. And Tim Durfee has the long memory of going third. So, April and I met in 1987 for the first time. I'd known her work for years and didn't spend much time looking at it, so I didn't really know it that well. Spending 3 hours talking nonstop that night, like machine gun fire back and forth, was the first introduction that I had to quite an exceptional way of thinking and a way of expressing, which was something that I, in retrospect, had longed to do myself, but didn't have the courage. I can't remember much specifically what we talked about that night, but it kept me spinning for quite a while. 2 years later, I met her again and talked about working together on a project in Japan, which we subsequently did. When I got to know the work by looking at it more carefully and working directly with her, I realized that I began to learn things that I was unaware of, but I felt that I already knew. The main thing was that form and content are the same thing. They're synonymous and simultaneous. As an architect, I had learned that form is first, content or ideas come second. The second phase of my education was that ideas come first, form comes second. And the third phase is working intuitively, that form and content is simultaneous. Her thinking is primarily visual, not merely verbal. She's guided by intuition, which is, intuition is intelligence and sensibilities combined, working at once. From that, it becomes evident when you look closely and read the image as well as the text, that the meaning is inherent in the work itself. The meaning is inherent in the language, and the language is inherent in the media. The meaning emerges from within the designer, within the media that she works in, the computer, and within the ideas themselves. Meaning is being. Her imagination and system of thinking seems to be interconnected with the media itself. including humans, other humans that she's working with. It's in working with her, one thing that I've probably learned to be the most important thing of all is to talk in silence. And so it is with love. Michael Dobry.
Not only am I the number 2 boyfriend, I'm the number 2 Michael. I don't know how many advantages that gives me. I'm very pleased to that April asked me to talk because I love to talk. And so what she's in effect done is loaned me her audience for a few minutes. So I did a little bit of calculating, and going by what I would call ear minutes, I'm going to gain about 18 hours worth of talking to one person here tonight. So I appreciate that very much, and I'm certain the person that would have gotten the 18 hours appreciates it as well. I'm not an expert in the area of graphic design, nor in the area of computer interfaces or its use in the arts. So I'm going to talk about my personal meeting with April. And again, it was working on a project which involved at the beginning a lot of talking and speaking. And I immediately realized that there were 2 things about her that, as I later got to know her work, very much defined her work as well, which is really to say that her character and her work are one, and that's fairly rare. It's mixed in with the computer too, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, the 2 aspects of her that struck me most powerfully were, number 1, her intelligence, and number 2, her playfulness and her sense of humor. Her intelligence is manifest in the way she goes about gaining information and structuring it for each of her projects. On one of the things we were working on, we spent hours and hours talking about the electron. And it was very appropriate because, as I'm sure you all know, 1998 is the centenary of the electron. And all the major physicists of the world will be having international celebrations. I'm sure you will all be included. Billions of electrons have been invited. The only irony is that really we're celebrating its discovery, its real birthday. We're about 16 billion years late, but give or take a few billionths of a second, we're pretty close. But it's that kind of thing that she loves to play with. She loves to try to find out how the world is structured through other disciplines and draw inspiration and information from that. The second aspect, her playfulness, is a very important part of her work, and it kind of threw me when I first met it. Her sense of humor has a very strong element of irony to it, and it, as I'll say in a minute, it's very connected to the way her work works, I think, is that you end up thinking twice. You end up sort of getting something, and then a few minutes later you go, oh, yes. And as a scientist, this can be very disturbing because the rationality of things, or the attempt to make things rational, is of course what we're paid, the billions and billions of dollars a year we're paid to do. But things are changing, and if you've been in any way influenced or know anything about some of the new disciplines like complexity theory and chaos theory, what we're learning to do is to find out that nature has a certain kind of playful aspect to it. It's technically seen as being a randomness, and this randomness has been very disturbing to the sciences. An example of the way that strict science has examined this sort of thing in the past was to look at the way, for example, Indian tribes used to decide on where they were going to hunt, or big trucks decided where they were going to drive. And what they would do is they would slaughter a buffalo, and they would look at the entrails, and from this they would figure out what direction they would take and with how many warriors they would go hunting. Or they would burn some bird bones and get the ashes and throw them up in the air, and they would point in a particular direction. And of course, traditional science looked at this with rather severe sense of mockery, like, what do these people think they're doing? And certainly the imaginary content that went along with this kind of behavior, well, we're still a little bit dubious about. But now we understand in a total ecological system that to randomize the area that you hunt in from year to year with the kind of intensity that human beings do, if this doesn't happen this way, you destroy your own pond, you destroy the ecosystem on which you're living, and pretty soon you have nothing but ashes and bones. So there was a very, very deep understanding of a process, maybe unconscious, but it worked. And this is something in complexity theory we're finding too, that sometimes when you randomize, certainly the I Ching, which was a guide for the director of a state, in a sense said, be crazy and you can defeat anybody. Don't do something they can figure out what next. How do you do that? You just throw some sticks in the air and decide where you'll attack. So this kind of integration in our rationality of the world is beginning to be very rich. And I think it's one of the aspects of creativity in general, and I think is a very, very strong aspect of April's creativity. Putting these two things together, sort of randomizing or playfulness or a sense of humor and a kind of strict, almost compulsion to get things right, to get them organized, have very high standards and all that sort of thing, come out to me as a sort of sense of irony. And so I'd like to, having described my encounter with her, describe my encounter with two of her productions, which are sort of on two ends of the scale. One is the stamp that she produced last year, which I don't know if it's called it in the profession or not, but it could be called the anti-stamp, because it's the first stamp in which a dead person's head, an animal or plant, or a piece of artillery was not the featured aspect of the stamp. In fact, the featured aspect of the stamp was a landscape full of a lot of subtlety and a lot of thought, which really drew you in, and ironically enough survived cancellation, which I don't know if they really took that into account when certain people criticized it. The second thing I wanted to mention, and something that I had a rather a less direct encounter with, is the SCI-Arc sign just outside. The first time I saw it, it looked sort of like a lightning bolt had hit some iron and somebody had decided to put this up as a monument to something. And I kept looking at this thing and realizing, there was an order to those holes. There was an order there. And finally, maybe my fifth visit, I figured out that it said SCI-Arc. And I think this is, and it was certainly appropriate, but I think this is one of the aspects of her work, is this invitation to take a second look. Sometimes even structuring it so you have to take a second look. This is a bit involved with irony, but it's also involved in making you aware of the medium itself, is to look at looking. There's both the intelligence that she has and the intuition that she has coming into play. And I think what we're going to find tonight is that her lecture itself will perform some of that function. And I fully expect, or I'll be disappointed if I don't, kind of wake up in the middle of the night, hopefully in the middle of an appropriate dream, and go, oh my God, I get it. Now I see what she meant. So I think you'll enjoy this as much as I am, and I hope you have that same double take. So thank you very much. And now, number 3 boyfriend, who breaks the mold, Tim Durfee.
This is running like a political primary for introductory speakers. So I'll make it brief. One of the only truly interesting aspects of the hype surrounding computer technology, it seems to me, these days, is that people will always find more interesting things to do with the software than its developers intended. April's work is a demonstration of that phenomenon, and more because it reveals other, less obvious transformations in sensibility and intention that have been brought about by the creative use of computing technology. Roughly 15 years after April started to explore the effects of the new imaging and graphics software on the actual process and product of design, software is just now becoming sophisticated and affordable enough to allow a similar transformation in architectural design. Because of this, April's presentation may offer a unique view into the present for architects to understand what effects these technologies might offer. There are 3 aspects of April's work which I believe give it particular relevance to architecture as a discipline and where it may be headed. Firstly, April's work can often be characterized by a sense of depth. The imaging techniques of layering and superimposition lend themselves to this, but perhaps most importantly, it anticipates what is perhaps a shared future for some architects and graphic designers. That is the development of 3-dimensional computer interfaces as type migrates from 2 to 3-dimensional space. Another important characteristic of her work is its energy and humor. It proves that one can sometimes derive a more meaningful signal when there's a little noise with it. This is also found in the healthy skepticism with which she approaches the technology. She manages to simultaneously celebrate and subvert the medium. April's intuitive openness and risk-taking is balanced with a strong sense of graphical order that largely comes from her training with the modernists Armin Hoffmann and Wolfgang Weingart in Basel. The value of her type of graphical language is evident in the dozens of publications she has designed for SCI-Arc. People respond to this work because the design itself demonstrates the exploratory spirit of this place. Finally, a quality that especially characterizes April's recent work is a concern for the spiritual and the mythological. Computing technology is essentially invisible, and to many of its users, completely mysterious, as opposed to the more causal, mechanical technologies. We associate it less with laws that govern the physical world, and perhaps more with other parts of our nature. In this way, technology and spirituality are strange cousins. It seems natural, even inevitable, then, that April's work is heading in this direction. There is much architects can learn from April and her work, and it is with great pride that I welcome my friend April Greiman.
Thank you, Justin. I'm sure there are other boyfriends out there. And I'm really embarrassed if I didn't invite you to introduce me, but we could wrap this up with more introductions, if you care to. Okay, I am doing my best to disguise the shakes, but I always start off this way. Could we have the, really important beginning animation? This would be the the first studies done by me at View Studios using some SGI equipment and a piece of software called Flame. And the Gramansky Labs has to do with a recent identification in the last year or so of my studio, and it's the Gramansky Labs, a purely scientific approach. So, since this is trying to be more scientific than ever, I actually am going to read a little bit of this presentation. Contrary to what my coach, Mike Dobry, told me, to not read this. Anyway, before I start the body of the presentation, since I have a dreadful memory, I really want to open up with my thanks to all of you for coming. And it's hopeless to look out there. Actually, I don't know why I keep doing that. It's completely black there, and I'm completely blinded by this light. So, I'd like to first thank really my 4 main assistants that I've had while having my studio in Los Angeles. Going back to Ron Romero, who caught the very early days of the beginning of using the Macintosh computer. So that would mean that he must have been there around 1984, which is when we got the Mac, or maybe even slightly before. I don't remember. Michael Ellison, Sean Adams, and currently Lorna Turner. And truly, all the work that you'll see here couldn't have been done without the 4 of them and everybody else who has collaborated with me. In regards specifically to collaborators outside of my studio, I would like to thank Michael Rotondi, boyfriend number 1, in case you've forgotten the pecking order there. Or in case Mike did. He gets pretty jealous, actually. He disguises it pretty well. But I'd like to thank Michael for actually some very beautiful words earlier, and to Roto Architects, who I've worked with on quite a few projects now, much to their demise. To Eric Martin, who I've worked on a lot, and vice versa. Who I've collaborated with on many projects, including the Lifetime TV spots that will be shown later. And Eric really was the guy who got the Mac first and then we started, I guess, beginning of the ending of our marriage over that Macintosh and whose turn it was to use it. And since it was Eric's, I was forced off of it, and I did get my own Macintosh. And then to Bob Engelsiepen of U Studios, who has luxuriated me in his studio time to help me study, progress, fool around, and just try things on normally unaffordable equipment for my small studio. And then I would like to thank also Margie Reeve for being a great sport, having to work with me so much, and I really enjoy working with her, and I think the products that come out of the school are truly a collaboration of her spirit and her willingness to try anything. Mary Jane O'Donnell from Mac Center, which is a recent client, and putting it mildly, very entertaining, very fast-moving, and very, very rewarding and meaningful projects. And then to my technology pals, Alex Jacobson and Brad Allen from Limbex Corporation. And then to Bon Lyman, Chris Baker, and Richard Childers, who were my collaborators on the interactive CD-ROM project called Infinite Illusions. Okay, thank you in advance. In case I faint later, and then I'll have this out of the way, that I at least showed some appreciation. Could I have the first 2 slides, please? Oh, I guess I have to do something. Whoop, whoop. All right. It's kind of funny. This slide of me, which I call Skinny Arlene, is really attributable to, not to the slide, but to the name Skinny Arlene, to Tim Durfee. And I would also like to say that he's been a big influence on me with his humor, and one night we were talking about the really great names of ex-cons, and mostly you think of men's names, but there aren't that many that come to mind when you think of women, and he mentioned Skinny Arlene, and I just identified with that so bad. And this was taken at the first graduation I went to at SCI-Arc, which I think was in 1989. And right over my head is Kurt Meyer's butt. I don't know if you can. So this is sort of a famous photo. Okay, so much for that. I wanted to just talk a little bit about my own schooling. And I had a very, very sort of strange, but in retrospect, very meaningful sort of stirring beginning. I did go to the Kansas City Art Institute in Kansas City, Missouri, and there I studied with 3 teachers from the Basel School of Design. I had 1 Russian, 1 German, and 1 Swiss, all who went through the full program in Basel. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, they didn't speak English very well. So it was a very interesting education, and in a way, I started off my graphic design education, and I actually ended it in Basel with sort of my first exposure to Zen, because there was no external information coming in other than teaching manual skills and giving an assignment in their best English. Then what I found was developing in myself, timidly but surely, was the ability to sort of find the answers inside. And it was pretty extreme, particularly when I went to Basel, expecting, of course, to think that there would be more answers, and in fact went there for answers because I felt that I didn't really have much concrete to go on from my several years undergraduate education. And in fact, it was even sort of more severe in Basel because there was a bigger faculty, And there were 20 international students, and the only common language was English, and none of the faculty spoke English. So I can honestly say that in my time working with Armin Hoffman, actually Weingart spoke very good English. He was the young feisty one. But Armin Hoffman, in all of my studying, never said anything to me. And I guess because of one advantage of my timidity was that unlike the other American students who were there who were shouting, you know, this is a crock, if you don't say anything, it doesn't mean anything, I have to have an answer right now, and they were really throwing tantrums, I just continued to work. I continued to look, and I continued to be guided in silence by that man. And then really learned to appreciate that a long time later. It was Christmas, and a Swiss man gave a Swiss watch to a Swiss son. The child took the watch apart on his bed. He was playing with the hands, the spring, the crystal, the winder, and all the little gears when his father found him and gave him a terrible beating. Until then, Nicole Rouen and her brother had been enemies. From that Christmas on, the first Christmas that Nicole could remember, the two of them were friends for life. On that day, Nicole learned that she too would be punished in all the years to come, because instead of asking the clocks of the world what time it was, she would ask them what they were like inside. Thank you. I didn't write that, unfortunately. That is by Eduardo Galeano. My presentation tonight really is about my discoveries, and I tried to neatly, as per Michael Dobry's saying, my trying to control or order everything when possible, which is always impossible, but the things fall into some categories, but not so neatly. And so I will try to, unfortunately, strap them to certain of these categories, but clearly there's so much overlap and so much commonality or similarity with some of the projects that I hope you will forgive me for trying to do such a stupid thing. So symbology, color and energy, the four elements, light, transparency, invisibility, language, and the unfolding of technology into the design processes are what this is about. So here we go with some slides. First, I'm just going to say, without really any explanation, I'm going to show sort of a mini body of work that I've done for SCI-Arc. So if you don't know, since 1989 until now, some of the projects, then you'll get a quick tour of them now. This is from the Edge, the student workbook. This is a page from that book, and a big Duratrans blow-up for an exhibition in Bordeaux, France. The workbook again. This was, I think, the only piece that we did for development office on the right. Some items. I think this is the second poster done for SCI-Arc, but in particular, the one on the right is quite beautiful. It was when we first started taking snapshots off the computer screen, and there's something really sort of texturally wonderful about that expression of the Mac. And then on the left is the printed piece. The infamous sign. I'm surprised nobody's trashed it. I guess they can't see it or something, or they would, I don't know. And the SCI-Arc, of course it's SCI-Arc, the admissions brochure, the one that had the little hole in it. On the right but actually the one on the right is also, you can see it at the bottom right again of the right-hand image, which is the poster that folded down into this little brochure for admissions. The back side of that poster, which then also became some of the pages of that brochure, and some pages from that brochure. That brochure contained, I think, one of my favorite quotes from the faculty, which I encouraged, and it was from Eric Moss saying, "Architecture can put a hole in your sky." Some of the very early and then to be controversial newsletters, they look pretty tame to me, but oh well. And then very current, the SCI-Arc website, soon to have the QuickTime VR movie by Tim Durfee, starring Tim Durfee. So if you aren't on the web, here's your trailer. Better check it out. And I understand students are working on links to their own pages, and eventually there'll be links to other lecturers and other institutions and other minds. Okay, the reading part. 4 billion years ago, the first living cell was created out of our spiral galaxy. The symbol of the spiral represents time, unfolding, and evolution. Does it make sense? If you give it a sense, it makes sense. This was my first sort of opus piece with the Macintosh. I was invited by Mildred Friedman of the Walker Art Center to do an issue of Design Quarterly on my work. And true to form, rather than just taking all the nice projects and having a nice printed retrospective, I decided to take the opportunity to learn a new piece of software. So immediately I created a nightmare. I was working prior to working on the Mac, I had invested in my own video equipment, half-inch video, as industrial video. Half-inch industrial video, I guess it's called. And so I had video equipment, and this particular piece of graphics was done with McDraw and McVision. And McVision was that first little box and piece of software that you could hook up your video camera and shoot it through into the Mac, and it scanned very slowly across your screen, and then you could capture an image or a picture. And of course, because the resolution of all this was very bitmapped, very low resolution, then you got this type of imagery. And I was trying to see if it made sense, having had a fairly classical background in graphic design in my education. For example, hand-setting type, painting colors by mixing them and using small brushes, painting my own letter forms, et cetera, et cetera. I found this tool sort of very freeing and definitely wanted to explore it. I ended up making a magazine into a fold-out poster, and it has an image of myself on it, life-size. So the poster is just a little under 5'4". Actually, the poster is 5'4". I'm exactly a little bit under 5'4". And so the front side of it was this bitmapped image, which had a personal timeline and my own personal evolution of the use of technology. And on the back side, it was all video imagery. This was a bit of a revolution because it was the first time I ever handed a stack of 8.5, 11 bond papers to a printer, and just had them numbered and said, print it. So the idea of tangible artwork is really changing at this point. Notes in the wrong place, I just figured it out. Only a spiral galaxy can bring forth new stars perpetually. These are outtakes, video outtakes for a video image which I used in this image on the right, which is for an exhibition. It's a poster for an exhibition called the Modern Poster. And I think this is my first example of what I called a truly hybrid image. The poster was composed, well, first of all, we used live video and video outtakes. We used the video paint box to get the distortion and the video images into the graphic paint box, which was a tool that ran about $700 an hour to use. So you use it gingerly, I guess, is what I could say about that. Contained in the poster is a gradation image made by the Macintosh, an airbrush spiral, a computer-drawn, a Macintosh-drawn golden section, and what else? And on the right, actually, the typography still was a problem for me, and so we actually manually pasted up that spiral of type. It wasn't possible to do it, and the quality of the type, you can see on the poster, it's difficult. There's not that much that could really be done at that time. And so I call this my first hybrid image. The first cells developed the ability to organize themselves. They could retain significant information such that they perpetuated the pattern necessary to make another. The dreaming is the beginning of the world. There was a period when all the ancestral beings moved about, forming the landscape and creating the plants, the animals, and the people of the known world. Only the dreamings were original and creative. People simply copy. When a new sacred song or design originates with an individual, it is said to have been found by them, often in a dream or some other extraordinary experience. The Orphic Egg. This is, in my research, the oldest symbol I could find representing creativity and transformation. The egg also is a symbol, of course, not only of creativity, but of birth. On the right is another poster for SCI-Arc. It's actually a poster which contains 4 different posters. It was, I don't know how, I guess it's, I don't want to go into why we always end up making 4 posters into one poster, but it trimmed out into SCI-Arc Architecture Education Instruction, SCI-Arc Mars Mission Crew, and SCI-Arc LA Experiments. On the backside of the poster, if you hold this up to the light, you can see the backside has admissions information, just general text about the school, but it does have the Orphic Egg. And so you can, with the right light, you can see this egg and snake completely come through that poster, although it's rarely seen that way, but it was sort of trying to explore the relationship of the two sides and the and symbology. I really wanted to use that symbol. Circles of involvement and interaction are now occurring. Relationships and interdependence is emerging. The first cells were then able to draw oxygen from the oceans and then release this oxygen into the land and the atmosphere. Infinite Illusions is a history of computer graphics. It's it was done as a demo disc. It's only about 40 minutes long. We did this about 2 years ago. This was with Bon Lyman, Chris Baker, and Richard Childers. It was done in Honolulu. I was responsible for the graphic design, the typographic design, and I actually ended up directing quite a bit of the overall concept and the symbology that was used. So here's a little sequence from Unfortunately, we couldn't get a projection screen for this CD, so I'm just showing you in stills. But one of the sections you can see begin emerging out on the right, and it's the egg symbol. And I used the egg as a symbol for studios and personalities. And so there's this very fast little animation, and then it comes to these still screens which have the various things you can click on and get more information from. The second sequence, if you click on the right of this main screen, you start the cube. And the cube is used principally in association with the earth. I used it here for the section on products and processes. It's really very interesting, more than 2 years ago now, investigating realizing for one thing that the client was of course saying, you have to design this page and this page, and I was really I was miserable having to use that word, and so I refused to use it. And we did design some things that got you off of the term page and chapters and things like terminology that came from books, because these really aren't books. These are environments. They contain images and text. They're accessed through association. The typography is a real challenge. We did a lot of studies to figure out what size and what typeface. It was a little bit like having our own school in the studio, where we really researched and looked at what the parameters were, what the technical limitations were to make good typography and to have screens really be quite readable and yet have some sensitivity to them. The holographic model offers revolutionary possibilities for a new understanding of the relationship between the parts and the whole. No longer confined to the limited logic of traditional thought, the part ceases to be just a fragment of the whole, but under certain circumstances reflects and contains the whole. As individual human beings, we are not isolated and insignificant Newtonian entities. Rather, as integral fields of the hollow movement, each of us is also a microcosm that reflects and contains the macrocosm. We each then hold the potential for having direct and immediate experiential access to virtually every aspect of the universe, extending our capabilities well beyond the reach of our senses. This is a quote from a man named Stanislav Grof. And this would start the second segment, which is symbol, energy, and color. The line of hominids to which we belong is a lineage of more than 15 million years old. Our structural features, full bipedalism, cranial capacity, opposing thumb, Dobry offered opposing ego, and dental pattern related to the omnivorous go back 3.5 million years. See, I have some memory for some things, but the physical characteristics of the brain have not evolved in 250,000 years. What has been evolving is our consciousness. I was asked to be the chairwoman and also to design the call for entries poster for the AIGA show called Communication Graphics. And at that time I was very interested in trying to figure out how my brain worked, if at all. And so I became fascinated with the idea that physically things had sort of come to a standstill, but we were still evolving. And so I used the brain as the symbol for communications, and I've positioned these computer paintings of brains at each of the 7 energy centers of the body. They're known as chakras, and they're located closer to the back of the spine, and they start at the base of the spine, and they run up into the crown of the head. And then I had also been researching for a long time color and what different cultures have attributed meaning to. And it was hard, extremely hard to find any universal agreement. But where I did find universal agreement, I included them here. And so the colors that I associated with each of the chakras are associated with 7 different colors. And so I've used those in conjunction with the brain paintings. So red is energy, creativity, primal force. The second chakra, orange, receptivity, wholeness. The second chakra being in the reproductive area of your body. Hello. Yellow being at the solar plexus, which is associated with mental and emotional activity. Green, which is located near the heart chakra. Green is the heart chakra color. Growth and balance are the attributes of that color. Blue being located at the throat chakra, creative expression, sincerity, patience, wisdom. Purple being the third eye, right in the middle of your forehead, royalty, vision, tranquility. And finally at the crown, and what's known as, I'll keep going, is white, and that's known as the crown chakra. And this is associated with a positive electrical charge, expansion, purity, and divinity. Okay, so here we go with Roto Architects. I'm going to do my best trying to talk about this. This is the Carlson Regis residence. It's in Los Angeles. It's at the brewery, where both of our studios also are. And I was commissioned to work on color, finishes, and materials with their office, the Roto guys. And this is an extraordinary space. It's clearly unlike anything I've ever been in. And it's so great that it's right, we can walk to the project. Used to be we could go there every day, now they're living there so we can't go every day, but it's so nice to, when you work on a project, particularly like this with architecture, that you can visit it when you're working on it, but then, you can't really enjoy the process. And one of the great luxuries for me of working on the color was that I was able to try colors and then observe them during different light conditions in big scale. And so I based the color palette on lichen colors. And I felt that the space was so incredible that what I wanted to do was to articulate the massing using color. And so one of the more controversial things that I've done in my career was this, which was that I took one of the main forms and I painted it a color called Anubis. And Anubis is about the blackest brown you could get. When it's very low lighting, it looks black, but it clearly is brown. And in researching Anubis, coincidentally, the Kathy Regis, one of the two people who commissioned this house, and it has her own kennel and raises show dogs. And It was a funny coincidence that Anubis is the Egyptian god of embalmment who had a black-brown body of a human with a dog's head. He takes the dead by the hand and introduces him to the sovereign judges before whom he weighs the soul. On the left, you can see sort of a yellowy ochre green color, and then there's a brown and a nearly black, and then there's quite a bit of a mossy green color on the floors, particularly in the upstairs. And here you can see the fireplace. And on the right, you can see what it's like. On the left, these are two different views of the same form. On the right, you're underneath this form, this brown form, which you see on the left. And it really became like experiences, like for me, like being in a canyon. And so you have these giant mountainous forms and these very sculptural forms, and I don't know, it just seemed a shame to leave them in white. So I definitely was in trouble for a while with their office, except for Mike. Mike was okay. Or maybe Mike was traveling so much that he just didn't even know that there was a wall painted Anubis. One funny story about it, though, was that while I tested the colors, I got a budget to test, like to do we bought a quart of paint and we painted like a 6 or 8 foot area. But when you have a 2-story wall, that becomes a joke. I mean, you can't tell anything. So I ended up having the painter and assistants in my studio roll out entire walls. They wouldn't paint the underside or the side, but they would paint the whole wall. And so we ended up painting this whole main space just with one coat, but nonetheless, it was more expensive than I had thought, and it was definitely more, the palette was more adventuresome than I had ever anticipated, but once I got going, I had to keep going. And the clients were in the Himalayas, and they had okayed the budget to work on small pieces to test, and the day after we finished what I called the test, I was really, really nervous, and as you could imagine, I think that's pretty normal if you paint somebody's wall black. In any event, I was going to write an explanation and a little bit of the history of the process, including some of the mythology behind Anubis, which I thought Kathy would find very fun. And I bumped into Kathy at Cafe Berlin, our little luncheon spot in the building. And I nervously said, "Oh, you're back. I thought you weren't getting back till tomorrow." And she said, "Yeah, we're back." And I said, "Oh, I want to explain, a little bit about the color, and so that you would have a feeling of how to live with it." She said, "I've seen it, and I can't live with it." And I was just on my way to another presentation with another client, and had I not been swept off by the energy of having another presentation and being excited about something else, I probably would have broken down and cried. But I truly understood how she could feel like that. And so I went off to my next meeting, and that took the rest of the day. And later I picked up my messages, and it was Kathy Regis saying that she had met an artist friend of her, a really close friend of hers, for lunch, and that he thought the colors were incredible, and he said, "You have to live with this. I mean, don't judge it. You just have to live with this. I mean, this is amazing." And so she just left me a very nice message saying, "I just want you to know I want to live with this for a while." I think she also said, "Don't come by for a few weeks, though," with those paint cans. And then later, a few weeks later, we got together, and she said that, unbeknownst to me, the experience of being in the Himalayas for 5 weeks, everything was white. Everything was pastel. I mean, the sun and the reflection off the snow and was dazzling and sort of blinding, and the subtlety of all of that. And she comes back, and she had seen her place white, and she comes back and she's got a black wall. among other things. I mean, I'm only showing you the downstairs. But I thought that was, when I got her message, I was really touched because I too would have had to live with it. And it's an incredible thing, the impact that color has on your emotions and how it can change you and can heal you. And so I really appreciated that. And I called her back just saying that was a gift. Her leaving me that message was truly a gift. All right, really. Oh my gosh. I should number my pages. I forgot about that technique. Okay, these are the times of day that the sun radiates these predominant colors. I find that pretty fascinating. Okay, the color and the four elements. The primordial fireball, nothing is sufficient unto itself. The original heat generated a vast storm of particles which were constantly emerging, unfolding again and again. On the right, I have an image of a bird which I'm using to represent the phoenix. Phoenix goes back to the Greek word for red, the color of fire. This bird rises again and again from the purifying ash. The building on the right is an artist's cabin in an arts community in Temecula called Dorland Art, I always forget the name, Dorland Art Community. How about that? Is that right, Mike? What is it? Dorland Mountain Arts Colony. And there was a cabin, there are 6 or 7 cabins, and the one at this location burnt in a fire. Accident, there's no electricity in Dorland, and one of the cabins, the artist who was in residence there really didn't understand how to light an oil lamp, and turned it on, and then went looking for matches, and then came back and burnt the place to the ground, and also his body of work, which he had with him on his way to a major exhibition. And so this cabin is a bit like the phoenix. It went down in fire, and the color palette comes very much from the natural elements in the area which I collected, but I made the exterior very fiery colors. On the left is an exterior shot. On the right is the interior. A lot of the inexpensive wood, which was most of it, we stained yellow. I wanted to have the wood feel, I was going to use the word natural, but that is the word I want to use. And I wanted this to be very warm inside and like the inside of the fire. Okay, now we would have the second piece of video, please. These are more studies done on the flame, and it was my intention to use these very little sequences and studies for building a movie for the Gramansky self-correcting mainframe on fire, which you'll see in a minute. And I was wanting to use these little studies as little movies on our website, but we're not there yet, but we want to be. But these are quite beautiful while you watch this plot and build the wireframe, and then you watch it, well, you watch the operator slug in the various elements that then go in real time and animate. And you can put so much information into this, it's awesome. And the problem being that the budget is always looming, or how much time, the hourly rate is always looming, not to mention that, from my understanding, this $90,000 piece of software called Flame, the operator is a really great young guy. He told me that everything I wanted him to do, he was having to do workarounds, which means that he had to do programming right on the spot because it has a lot of bugs. But what do you want for $90,000? You can see this is a purely scientific approach by now, I'm sure. There should be one other. Oh, there. We didn't see it. Or maybe we did, it was really subtle, but I think we're missing. There's one more thing on there. I wouldn't mind if you ran it over that slide, but nope, it's not that. Okay, it's on the next tape. Did we see Lorna? Are you here? Lorna? This is how it goes with Lorna and I all day. Lorna, are you in here? Yep, I'm in the bathroom. Did we see the full movie? Oh, okay. Wow. Whoa. Okay, so you got to see the fire and the water and all that. It's amazing. I didn't see it. Okay. The next sequences are images or screens from our website, in case you haven't visited it lately. So here we are at our website, the Gramansky Self-Correcting Mainframe on Fire. The illustration on the left was the original wireframe drawing, which was used to then go on and make much more elaborate attempts at using SGI equipment. The infamous anti-stamp. Last week I got a call from a guy named Maurice at Stamp Magazine who left a message on the voicemail saying he wanted to know if I would call him back and comment on the recent poll that their magazine did, of which they voted on all the stamps that had been introduced in 1995, and my stamp, of course, came in by a long shot at the bottom. It was the worst stamp of 95, folks. Now, wait a minute. I'm still going to tell this story. So, of course, the first thing you do is get pissed off, and you hate those people for, voting that way. But I don't know, I thought it was pretty interesting. I have been very aware of its controversial nature, and it's been written in other magazines. It's called the MTV stamp. It's called the biggest. One guy said in Lynn's Stamp News that it was he'd been stamp collecting for 50 years, and this stamp was so bad he wouldn't even use it for postage. And it goes on and on. I mean, it's amazing how much criticism. I mean, maybe a lot of stamps get this, but what do I know? I mean, this is the first stamp I've done, and probably the last. But so I slept on that message from Maurice, and then I did call him back the next day, and he was like, "Oh, April Greiman. Oh, thank you so much for calling me back. You did get my message, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I wonder if you want to comment." And I said, "First, I'd like to ask a question. What's the average age of your reader?" And then there was a pretty long pause. And he said, 60. So I said, "Then I'll take it as a compliment." And then he didn't like that. And so I decided to reach for more generosity on my part. And so I told him about other, well, I asked him what was the best stamp of 95. Aha. And he told me it was a Civil War stamp. And I said, it is a funny irony that the women's suffrage and contemporary issues, which are freedom, progress, equality, are at the bottom, and the war is at the top. He said, well, that's very interesting. And he said, but what about the color? It's badly printed. And I said, sometimes it is badly printed, that's clear. If you look at, when you buy these stamps, if the 19th Amendment bar at the bottom isn't solid black, you're barely going to be able to read this image. But even so, I said, there's a lot here. First of all, it's not a portrait of a dead person, so that must be pretty shocking. It has 4 images in it, and it's a teeny thing. It's an inch and a half long. And I said, I felt that even if you couldn't literally read the image, that you could read the texture of the image. And if you couldn't figure that out, you could read the words freedom, equality, progress, because they were printed in intaglio on top of the 4-color offset printing. And I told him that the purple at the top in the clouds was a color used to express wisdom and vision. And I went on to describe the other colors, and he said, well, what about that image in the front, that yucky green? And I said, it is an odd green, but it's in a triangular shape, and the triangle is a symbol of dynamic change. And he kept a little bit trying to argue with me about it, and I kept trying to educate about it. And finally he said, we should write an article about this. Our readers should really know about this. I mean, you put a lot into this. So we left friends, and then, and I thanked him, and I just said, whether your readers like it or not, you're going to see a lot more stamps like this, because it's a contemporary image. It uses photography, it's done on the computer, and there are ideas represented in it. It's not just a portrait, it's not a literal read, although there are literal images. But anyway, we'll see what happens with that. This is a product that is available on the web. The designers of this product are the Limbex Corporation people, and the product's called Web Compass, and it's distributed by Quarterdeck, and it's a search engine. And to my knowledge, of course, I'm very prejudiced, it's the best search engine. It actually, if you have your computer on and you have the agent working, it will continue to scour all databases in the known universe, and maybe even then some, to bring back information. Unlike other search engines like Yahoo or whatever, you can type in something and whatever it brings back, you get what you get. And with this, as long as your computer's running, it will continue to retrieve information. And it's amazing, to be able to actually go on the web and get the information you're looking for. Of course, we all know it's fun to surf the net, and you can spend the rest of your life, and you may never find what you're looking for, but who cares? But if you're in business, you might want to, and so this is a really good product. So this was Comdeck's Product of the Year, I'm proud to say. Okay, the Rascals, Roto Architects. This is their project on our website. I showed this to Mike, and Mike goes, oh, we have our own website? I said, no, Mike, this is it's a photo of a page on our website. He goes, oh, we have our own website? It's like, no, Mike, not yet. He goes, how come we don't have our own website? It's like, could somebody answer that for Mike? Some of these questions, they're too profound. You're going to get one. We'll get Dobry to get, oh, we get Durfee. And on the left is a detail of the Roto Architects stationery. Unfortunately, it's a little bit upstaged by the large black objects on the wall. But it utilizes obviously a digitized image of sort of the landscape from downtown at our studio. And on the right are more materials for Roto materials. The brochure for the bicycle exhibition with, of course, mastermind Randall Wilson in charge of the bicycle workshop, and Barish and Guthrie Architects doing the installation at Grand Central Station in New York. This is also an interactive CD-ROM project. The client is Peggy Weil, and we did a series of little animations for a piece for children called Inside Out, Upside Down, and Backwards. And of course, these t-shirts are available. On the left is the No Thinking If Thinking, Think Nothing t-shirt. Thank you, Mohammed Saei, for the inspiration for that one. And on the right, of course, is one of my relatives, The Purely Scientific Approach. And that's also available. And the guy has, when you get your own t-shirt, you'll see that he has mint green sandals on. And I don't know what he does at the beach, but his legs are so bruised, you wouldn't believe it. We're moving right along here, except I'm not reading any of my text, just as Dobry suspected. Okay. Ooh. Okay, water. Associated with the feminine principle and the unconscious. This is also an animation, which we've taken some screenshots of for computer visualizations. It's the company in Honolulu that produced the Infinite Illusions CD-Rom project. And here's how it goes. Interesting logo, I think. When I was working on it, of course, if you have Macintosh experience, you know that of course, the first thing you do when you're working on a logo is you type in the name of that client, and then you're going to, of course, select that and then choose a typeface. So I type it in at 72 point, and bingo, because I automatically selected a type that was too big for the area that I had indicated, it went to compute, and then the R dropped down to the next line. And I thought, damn, this is going to take I have to redo this. And I thought, this is great. This truly shows the process. This is it. This is what happens. So I ended up putting in the other elements, the little handles on top and bottom that you would have in a page composition program where you do type. And then we did a Photoshop version of visualizations. And then I sent this off, and I thought, somebody at this company is going to say, this is stupid. I mean, what's this compute R? It's like it looks broken. So I got great feedback from the client. Of course, most of my relationships are by voicemail now, or voicemail, email, or fax, but he just said, this is fucking incredible. He says, this shows exactly the process. And he said, everybody hates it here, so I know we were onto something good. And so they love it. They now love it. Actually, Mike and Mary Jane can probably talk about the reception of the SCI-Arc stationery initially. We can talk about that later. And so here's how this little animation goes. I don't know, I keep calling it little, but oops, we need to shut the slides down for a minute and show some Lifetime TV spots. These were done in the late 80s. I don't remember exactly when, and my collaborators were Eric Martin and Bob Engelsiepen. And we I particularly like this one, so I'm going to be quiet. We took the budget that we were given, and instead of giving it to Bob Engelsiepen to do the post work, we shot a lot of this using not high 8, but 8mm video. I had the camera on my shoulder, Mike was driving the van, and I shot out the window. We used Kodak disposable camera prints. And that's a Kodak disposable camera. Well, I guess you can also dispose of the prints too. We use Macromind Director, and we did all of it low end, what I call the profound low end. And instead of doing 3 TV spots, we did about a dozen. And those are some of them. Okay, slides. Oop. Can you, again. Sorry about this. This is so literal, and not really. Air, the principle of wisdom, clarity of thought, otherworldly concerns. Well, actually, it's quite applicable to Coop Himmelblau, wouldn't you say? And on the right is their stationary, which is really hard to, as big as that is, you bet you can't read it. I don't think it's focused, though, for one thing. Oh, well. And one of the projects for Max Center at the Schindler House is an upcoming exhibition next week. It opens called Architecture Again, the Havana Project. For sure, the one on the right's out of focus, isn't it? I have really bad eyes, but. Okay, Earth, fertility and the feminine principle. The first project associated with that is Nicola Restaurant. The Roto Architects, again. The palette here was based on wood, rock, and stone. You can see on the left the stationery has rocks and twigs, and on the right is a sandblasted glass sign for the kiosk, which use some of the same patterns of the rocks and twigs. The atrium view of Nicola Restaurant and one of the interior shots. And I should also say that Lisa Krohn collaborated on this and did the lighting fixtures with great ease. And Greg Abbott, of course, with great ease. Or less great ease, I don't know. And one really fascinating aspect to this project was that I wanted to base the palette on beautiful woods, like and the colors of bamboo, or like an ash. And it turned out that I had never worked on a restaurant interior, and that unbeknownst to all of us, I think, all the wood had to be fireproofed, and that sounded fine. I thought it would be like Scotch guarding your couch or something, but indeed it puts like a milky white yucco kind of surface on things. It's really awful. So a lot of the wood had to be restored through color. And so almost everything, we intended to stain a lot of this, and instead we had to paint a lot of it. And so the whole palette, though, still is mostly bamboo colors. And 2 images that were designed for matchboxes, and also for mini billboards in the downtown area. Okay. We have been moving technologically from the honoring and nurturing of the earth to the domination and abuse of the earth through the Industrial Revolution, etc., towards the potential reconciliation and healing via the clean, easily storable, reusable technology. We have therefore been moving from Earth-based technology to air-based possibilities. We have been moving economically from land and objects to information. Limbex is a corporate website. They are the designers of Web Compass, search agent, and this is their website. What's really great about working with these guys is that we designed this first screen for them, and by the time we came back to look at how they were implementing this, they had used their own software to develop, so it's a self-creating software, because when you click on the Landsat image of the LA basin, which you see on the top left, about every 15 minutes, or it's hard to say, Saturday, March 16th at 5:05:14, it comes up, it searches and brings back any graphical information related to the LA basin. So sometimes it's an earthquake map, sometimes it's a traffic thing, sometimes it's a weather thing. It's amazing, and it's really a pleasure to work with people like this who are a lot smarter than you are, and also know how to use the technology. It was a nice experience working with them, because this is a really fast-moving area. When we started doing web graphics, we actually would physically transport images, Photoshop images, and now we put these up on the web and the client grabs them down and they do their own mapping and authoring. So, I mean, you can have a website in, well, I don't want to say how little time, because then I wouldn't get a very good fee, but it's, you know, nearly instantaneous. There's another page, oops, there I go, using that word, another screen for them, and icons. On the right is a really, it's what I call, you know, Greiman the bozo example of, Eric Martin was teaching me this piece of software called Infinite D. And ostensibly because you can do wireframe, you can do modeling, you can light your objects, and you can also animate typography with this. And so he recommended, I was trying to figure out what program I should start to explore on my Mac. And forget typography, folks, but I am pretty fanatical about that. But this is incredible. So what you can do is, I took the Landsat image, and now, there's a lot of steps to this, but it's possible to map. It'll read dimension when you translate this to a black and white image, and it'll map peaks and valleys, if you will, in this case, of the Landsat, of the LA basin, because of the gray scale or the gray values in the image. And so what I was talking to Brad Allen, VP Technology at Limbex, was the next phase, of course, and of the web will be to really stop talking about the page, web pages and so forth, and to get off of this paradigm. And that we're really, we can start to create spatial environments for the first time. And so what my thinking was, Brad said they'd really like to do that and have different scale things, like you click on something and it obviously comes forward, and you could have multiple things, which you can already, even since I talked to him, images on screen simultaneously. But what my intention was here was to do a simple animation where you could go from macro to micro into the LA basin in a real three-dimensional way, where you can actually go into, you know, the Santa Monica Hills or whatever. I don't even know what's in there really. I have bad eyes, but this was the start of that idea. Okay. Light, transparency, invisibility, and language. At the point that the hydrogen atom is formed, the universe became transparent. It is now possible for the photons to carry information from place to place. There is light. This is what allows us to know the universe. On the left is a client of mine, Lux Pictures, And this is a beautiful name because it means light. And we did a number of studies of sort of manipulating light and photographing those, which hopefully we'll be able to use in animations and maybe even in on film at some point when these guys get their first movie ready for me. And on the right is quite an old piece done on vellum, Vellum Mania. This was done for Co-op Himmelblau, a project of theirs called the Open House, which was designed for a client in Malibu, Malibu Canyon. And I think I may not be correct on this, but I think the client died, and Co-op Himmelblau bought the plans back from the family. If anybody knows if this is correct, you could correct me or shout out what is really the truth here. But they had incredible, drawings and renderings and models and so forth. And so they were trying to promote this and see if they could sell it to another client. And so I proposed printing these images and these drawings and this text on vellum. And it really has an interesting sort of spatial. It was the first time I did something quite like this that had this spatial and sort of multiple readings and textural sort of emotional impact kind of a piece. MoCA exhibition, the Roto Architects again. This was a project a year or two ago, year and a half ago perhaps. Urban revisions, current projects for the public realm. We not only did graphics, but we did, I call these large Duratrans films ephemeral architecture. This was sort of a big scale attempt at hybridizing 2-dimension and 3-dimension. These were all transparent, and so when they were hanging as theme panels throughout the exhibition, you could actually see. It was like being able to see into a city. You could see activity and movement and people sort of reading the text or looking at projects, and they were throughout the exhibition. Does anybody want to talk about this? All the energy that would ever exist in all of time exploded and is an unfolding quantum. There is no place in all of the universe that is separated from that originating power. The intention here of using vellum, which is translucent, was for me to explore space. I mean, truly, if you fold this up, you can. It's the only printed thing. It's the only way to really have, there really is space. You can have an image seen through an image, through an image. And Margie and I concluded that while we always tried to be from the edge and on the edge, that this was clearly a piece that went over the edge. But I think it works, and I think it works because it really bridges the literal and the abstract, and that we read things, not only through the physical, but through the sort of spiritual, which has its own order, and spiritual meaning sort of the essence of the thing, the energy or the force or the power that's sort of embedded in it. Enough said. This is the first thing I ever did not the first thing, but the first piece of graphics done as part of the whole body of work or the whole program of graphics for SCI-Arc. And this was the identity for SCI-Arc. And when I was working one of my first times on the graphic paint box, which is the final really high-end composition tool that I used to do the Museum of Modern Art poster, which was in '88. This identity was in '89. And in '88, I sort of stumbled across an incredible sort of technological revelation for me, which was that when we were magnifying an image to retouch it, I had brought a gradation for that Museum of Modern Art poster. And I'd used the gradation to represent time and space. And when we went to retouch it, really, we blew it up so we could just really finely pick out. What happened was something very similar to what you see on the right, which was that for the first time I realized sort of what the DNA of the computer was like, that the pixel, that this software, the reason that this computer is so expensive is that these people spent $1 million creating a feature, which we all take for granted now on the Mac, but in 1988 was pretty revolutionary. And it's a feature called anti-alias, which means that you don't get a jaggedy edge, which most computer stuff looks like. And so what happens is that every pixel, when you blow it up, it breaks down into 16 million colors. And so each one of these pixels in this gradation is really its own icon, and it really reveals the architecture and the language of the computer. And I just remember being stunned, and I said, hold it, okay, this is it, this is what I want. And of course, the guy who I was working with said, hey lady, they spent $1 million, so you can't have this, This only looks this way when you magnify, but there's no way to get this. So I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is where it's at, This is it. This is the story. This is the beginning. So a year later, when I was working on SCI-Arc stationery, I decided to use the same gradation, not the same, but a gradation on the stationery. And what we did to conquer this problem was I hired a photographer, and we shot 2 1/4 shots off the screen, because you couldn't capture this. There was no way to get this digitally. It's absurd. But we got it. And then it was used, then it was translated into black and white, and then printed in the color on the left, that sort of beigey color, so not to offend. "15 billion years ago, time began simultaneously with this birth. Out of this matrix, conditions arose that enabled temporal events to occur in space." Actually, this is where I first discovered that this is not a tool, this is a process. This is a whole different ballgame here, what's going on. And that there really is a creative dialogue going on between me and it. And the final project is Walker Art Center exhibition, Graphic Design in America. I, for obvious reasons, chose the American flag, and the basic idea here is to show the impact of technology on graphic design, as graphic design has always been aligned with technology. On the left of the poster is an image of a steel-engraved stamp. The next strip of bigger stars would be the impact of offset printing on graphic design. The next stripe, or the striped area, red stripes, is the impact of video technology on graphic design. And finally, on the far right would be the impact of the computer on graphic design. What was really amazing here, one of the many amazing things here, is that this image was composed in Los Angeles, and then, and this is not so revolutionary now, but some years ago it was, and that we transmitted these files, one to Minneapolis, where the poster was made on the right, And the one on the left, we transmitted the same identical files to a billboard company in Ohio, and they made an 80-foot billboard. But perhaps what's even more profound of a discovery for me, along the lines of language and light, is that on the right is a detail of the billboard. If you see the billboard from normal viewing distance, it looks exactly like the poster. It looks very crispy and sharp, and in fact it is identical because it is digital in color. But if you get up close, as we have the opportunity to do, particularly in the studio, where we have a smaller version of this, you can see the texture and also the sort of the native language of the computer, because finally the computer is the translator of this information, the carrier of this information. And when you're working, in a dark room with these paint boxes, and you've got a high definition television, it's like the biggest, it's giant, like 5-foot thing. And you're looking at the color and everything's so sharp, and you really think that's it, that's what you're getting. But in fact, what's revealed on the left, and if you could, can you kill the, that's a terrible expression, can you shut off the one on the right? Really, I hope you can see this way in the back. But if you walk up to this image, what I didn't realize till I had the smaller, there were 2 billboards made, and when we got one of them back from the exhibition, I was astounded to see that what's revealed here is captured light. Each one of these offset printed dots or pixels actually, is moving. We've captured movement here. We've captured light. It's, and I don't know what to say about that. I was just deeply touched by realizing that I still don't know what's going on here, but something's going on here. This is amazing. I hope you can see that. The illusion of working in a dark room and a high-definition monitor is pretty amazing. You really can't see what's going on. Energetically, we're dealing with vast moving wave fields. We pick up information not only in the literal, but through the abstract of form and pattern. We are only human beings in language. The beginning was a sparkling, which had and has no out there. We are all in it. Our senses, our imaginations are from here. Our bodies and our sensitivities are from here. All living things originated here inside, spiraling outward. Our current cosmology, which is more quantum in nature, has led us towards measuring and judging how big, how far, how old, how many. This has led to the disintegration of the whole. As long as we view the universe as out there, we are under the delusion of separation. If we remember that we are inextricably interdependent, that all is whole, that everything truly is connected to everything else, then we will begin to understand the need and concept of compassion. If we view our present situation not as a crisis, but rather as a transformation, then we can reintegrate the primordial fire outside with the internal workings of our being. We are in the first civilization that spans the entire globe and potentially integrates all other societies, submitting ourselves to a common global destiny and aesthetic. Windows on memory. On the shores of another sea is an old potter. On the shores of another sea, an old potter retires. His eyes cloud over, his hands tremble. The hour to say goodbye has arrived. Then the ceremony of initiation begins. The old potter offers the young potter his best piece. As tradition dictates among the Indians of Northwest America, the outgoing artist gives his masterwork to the incoming one. And the young potter doesn't keep that perfect vase to contemplate or admire. He smashes it on the ground, breaks it into 1,000 pieces, and incorporates them into his own clay. Thank you very much. I think I've asked all the questions. Typically there aren't any.